In this clip, we'll look at interactive rendering in V-Ray called IPR, which gives you quick rendering feedback as you make changes in your scene. Now let's go ahead and load the scene file patio scene IPR. In this scene, we have an outdoor patio setup with a house and some plants and trees in the background. We'll be using the scene throughout this course, developing it further and further in V-Ray as we go along. Now, this is an early version of the scene where there's a lot of work still to do with materials and such, but there is a sun and sky lighting already set up and a camera for you here. Make sure that V-Ray is enabled and set as your renderer. Now, make the camera viewport active, and of course, if you click the render icon, you'll see this view start to render progressively in the VFB. Now again, progressive rendering, like we've seen in a previous clip, keeps improving the image until the time limit or the noise threshold is reached, both of which are in render settings here. Now I'll stop the render before it hits the max time, and I'll clear the VFB to get a fresh start. For an interactive render, however, click Maya's IPR icon, and since you're already set to V-Ray, it will kick off a new V-Ray IPR render of this active view in the VFB. Similar to progressive rendering, this image will continue to update its quality over time, but anytime you make a change to the scene, the IPR will update to show the change that you've made, like if I move the camera. Now, if I want to make a bunch of changes without a constant update, I can pause the IPR render here and make adjustments in my scene quite quickly. When I click the icon again, it resumes the render, having acknowledged the changes that I made while it was paused. This is definitely faster than simply stopping the IPR render with the stop icon and then restarting a new IPR render. For example, this cushion looks kind of odd in the render. I'm going to pause the IPR and take a look around to see if there's something in the way casting a shadow, and it's not. Since so much of lighting and rendering is troubleshooting, this is a nice exercise to follow. Now, I would next check the normals of the geometry to maybe soften them, but I already know that's not the case with these cushions. See, the cushions look smooth here, but that is because of Maya's smooth preview, which does not render automatically that way. When I press 1, I see the cushion's actual polygonal shape and not the smooth preview when I press 3. So I'm going to go back to 1 in the actual geometry, and while the IPR is still paused, I'm going to select the cushion and go to Mesh, Smooth, to actually smooth the geometry itself. Now I can unpause the IPR and it shows the change that I've made to the geometry, and that weird shadowing effect is gone. Now I'm going to stop the IPR and I'm going to find a new angle with the Persp camera this time. In the VFB, I can right-click on the Start Interactive Rendering button to get a list of the views that I can render. I'll pick Persp to render the perspective camera view directly. The same also goes for a full render. If you right-click on the render icon, you can pick the view for that render. Now, stop the IPR render in the VFB, and I'm going to show you something pretty cool you can do with your view panel. You can actually have V-Ray's interactive IPR render going in a view panel directly. Now I'm going to set one of my other panels to the camera view, so now I've got 2. And in the second one, in the panel's menu bar, I'm going to click Renderer and select V-Ray IPR. And it updates an IPR render directly in that panel. If you click on the option box, you can choose if you want your IPR rendering to happen on the CPU or on your video card's GPU. If you have an NVIDIA card, you'll want to set this to CUDA. If you have a non-CUDA capable video card, such as one from AMD, you can choose OpenCL. And of course, if you don't have a powerful graphics card, such as on some laptop, you can simply have IPR go through the CPU just as easily. And I'll do that here. I'll set it to CPU. I just need to restart the IPR in the view panel by setting it back to viewport 2.0, and then again back to V-Ray IPR to get the CPU running. Now, you may want to experiment with one of these options to see which one works best for your system. But keep in mind, CUDA is for NVIDIA cards, while OpenCL is for other GPUs that don't support CUDA. But when in doubt, CPU works really well, and as you can see, the view panel is pretty responsive inside the panel itself. Now in the options, while the IPR panel is active, I can set the undersampling value to be lower to get a nicer look in the view panel, but with a slower response. And if I set the undersampling up to a higher number like 5, I get a much more zippy action inside the panel, but with a little bit of a less quality as I'm moving around the camera. I'm going to keep mine at 5. I can move around faster. It's got a little lower quality, but once it settles, it'll just get better from there. Now, you can also reduce the resolution of the panel for even faster response, although it does look fuzzy, so I'm going to go ahead and keep mine at 100%. Since this is an actual view panel, you can work in here like you would normally, editing objects, moving things around, and so forth. If you manipulate objects through the IPR, the selection mode option changes how selected objects look in the IPR panel view. Now, I personally prefer the wireframe view. It looks better, and it works really well in the view. And of course, if you want to get out of the IPR render, simply set the renderer back to viewport 2.0. Now, let's go back to starting an IPR render in the VFB. Now, when I right-click in the VFB, I can enable Select Object. Now, whatever I select in the VFB image itself, we'll select that geometry in the scene like this. Now go ahead and open the Hypershade. Right-click inside the IPR render in the VFB and enable Select Material. Click on the towel here and its material is selected in the Hypershade. Click on the chair and the chair's material is also selected in the Hypershade. Now, both of these neat features only work while IPR is running and not while it's paused or stopped. So, as we've seen in this clip, you can have an interactive V-Ray IPR render either in the VFB or directly in one of your view panels through which you can actually manipulate the objects in your scene.